Doesn't it? You kind of look for them. Okay, councillors, we will make a start if we can, so that hopefully we can get through the majority of the business in time to let the early leavers depart. We're now on item 8, which is the local Indigenous biodiversity pilot, and it does include, so that you'll find that on page 27, or as item 8 in your agenda. There is a recommendation for us to adopt the pilot and the strategy by next year. So this is not a final look at it, but this is the important development phase of it, so that come next year we can have the confidence to adopt what we need to adopt and get on with the action. So thank you very much. We've got, Paul is going to lead through the presentation, and there's a lot of documentation in here, so you'll get to the salient points, and she'll introduce Bruce and Don to talk to any of the key items of note and leave plenty of time for discussion. Brilliant. Thanks.
So, Morena, I'd like to introduce Professor Bruce Clarkson from the University of Waikato, and we've got Don Scarlett from Mercury. Both Bruce and Don were part of the external advisory group working with us along through this project. I'd also introduce Maria Barry, who's also been part of the project all the way through. So some really good work has been happening jointly and collaboratively with the Regional Council, Tangata Whenua, the community groups and others to develop a framework to improve our biodiversity from 2% to 10% over time. So I'll take the report as read and allow for any questions.
Bruce, would you like to say something in general about the target? And I'm particularly interested because I know that government has been having some very recent discussions with their own advisory group, plus making some determinations to go forward. Can you perhaps, because that's quite new,
yes.
Can you talk to us about that, please?
Yes, certainly. So thank you for the opportunity. What is going on in New Zealand at the moment is a new New Zealand biodiversity strategy is being developed, and there's been a process undertaken of consultation around the country with all of the key stakeholders in that process, ranging all the way from fed farmers through to Māori, and every conceivable stakeholder has been brought into the picture. So as part of that process, I've been made presentations myself to the reference groups, and recently I've been appointed to the reference group put together by the Minister that will actually develop the new New Zealand biodiversity strategy. The key aspect that we're talking to here is the 10% target, and I will just clarify that. The 10% minimum target is largely what is going to be adopted across New Zealand in what are called biodiversity depleted environments. Most urban centres, of course, are biodiversity depleted. Here in Hamilton, though, we've been leading the way, and some of the documentation that's gone to the national body has actually focused in on how Hamilton has embarked on a journey to achieve the 10% target, because of course the 10% target is already in the district plan. And so essentially it's a question of how we achieve that by working in collaboration and partnership with the community, and this is the important aspect of the report that Paula has tabled, as she's involved and consulted with the community widely, And the point here is it's not just a council responsibility to achieve this target, it's a target that we all want to sign on to and we all need to do something about. And of course the beauty of Hamilton City is that because of its particular and special landscape geography, if you like, we can achieve this by utilising public lands, like the example at Waiwhakariki, Natural Heritage Park, through the gully restoration program and other elements of our green space network across the city, and by collaborating particularly with private landowners who back on to, for example, gullies. And if we all work together on this, we can do it in a way where we don't need to enforce rules in the way that some other councils have gone, but do it through a collaborative process. And I think this is the key point that is made in the document that Paula has tabled here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Don, your point of view, your inclusion in this has been around some of the economic benefits of biodiversity as well, isn't it? Did I read that in the report? That's one of the...
Yeah, so for those who don't know me, while Paula introduces me as being Key Relationships Manager for Mercury, I'm also a trustee of the Waikato Catchment Ecological Enhancement Trust. I'm the co-chair at Mangatautri Ecological Island Trust. I'm a advisory trustee to Waikato River Care. So there's I'm one of those people who connects a lot between business and the environment, and I guess I'm also a director of Hamilton Waikato Tourism, as many councillors will know. So I'm that connector person, and I guess I've also, there's been two of us from Mercury who have represented the electricity generation sector in the biodiversity collaborative group. So there's some fingerprints of mine, both in the local Indigenous biodiversity strategy as a funder and as a corporate and business partner, trying to bring some business perspectives to this process, and also some fingerprints as an experienced investor or funder. I like to think of it more as an investor in biodiversity enhancement across Kirikiriroa, across the Waikato, and across Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Thank you. So first question, Councillor Tuman.
I think Bruce might have just about answered it. Page 2812. Last time you were here, Bruce, I think you said if we counted all the riverbanks and parks and all these sort of areas, we would actually achieve the target without doing anything else?
Well, not achieve the target without doing anything else, with respect.
All those areas.
If we took the public resource, if you like, if the riversides, the gully network, which is publicly owned, some of the green space which would be suitable for this style of restoration, we could get within 1 or possibly 2% of the 10% target by working in that area. We still would need a little bit of collaboration with some private landowners, and of course that would have to be on the basis of willing landowners who are prepared to work with us. But we could get really close to the 10% target just by utilising the resources that we currently have publicly at our disposal.
Okay. Like years ago, you might remember Seeley, who was the medical practitioner here, he developed all that gully. If we had those sort of people, we would actually achieve it, would we?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So Elwyn Seeley's gully is the model of how we can do this. So the thing is, having the available land is one thing, running the programs to restore and reconstruct the habitat and bring the birds back and all of that stuff is another. That is the critical component of this report, I guess, is what would be the implementation strategy which would deliver on the biodiversity strategy.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for that report. I just wondered, I was just looking at page 28, number 7, and you were talking, and that goes along with what Councillor Tuman just said about the landowner. So, I mean, how many of the landowners are keen to do something with the gully restoration project? I'm just thinking of one that's worked really, really hard, Christina Campbell, in her gully. So are there many more like her in the city?
Certainly, there's quite a few private landowners doing their own work within the gully systems, yes.
And we support them actively, or they just do their own thing?
Some of them are supported through the community staff that is provided through council, which helps a number of groups with their planting, weeding and so forth. So that's already happening now.
Okay.
I understand that somebody's working part-time in this area at the moment.
Okay. So
But
they
compared
used
to the past, of course, you know, we have to be honest here and say that we did previously have quite a significant gully restoration program,
Yeah, okay.
and the resources that go to that now are quite limited. When that was being undertaken, there were approximately 550 landowners who registered to be involved in the gully restoration program, and that network has not really been talked to for some significant amount of time. So yes, you know, the ingredients are there, but the question again is, how do we lift this to really achieve the 10% target?
Okay, thank you. I've got one more question, and it's on page, let me have a look, 35, and it's the last one. Consider the development of a carbon forest policy to explore future cash flow opportunities. What do you mean by that? What are the cash flow opportunities with that? We're not planting pine trees, are we, in the city?
No.
And have a moth hanging around
No.
and being sprayed. Good. So what is the?
So the government's going through a process at the moment of changing the dollar values of the emissions trading scheme. There's a lot of councils actually working throughout the country on parks and reserves and looking at the opportunity of how they can actually bring in cash flow. So there could be opportunity there to bring in that cash flow. And in the body of the report, there's an example whereby we did a little bit of an exercise for 5 whakariki based on $21. A $21 rate, we could gain $4,000 per year for that particular reserve.
Okay. And the last question is that the government wants to plant 1 billion trees. Are we part of that, or do we get some, or is there some financial initiative from the government for us or something?
So there's still quite a lot of distance to travel on the Billion Trees program. There is a process being put in place where regional and local government will be able to apply for funding. The point there is that it would have to be fully collaborative between the regional council and the city and the community and iwi in terms of how they might band together to put together an application once the rules and regulations around how you do that are put in place. So they haven't quite got there yet with some of the funding opportunities. They haven't developed the template for applications, for example, but we are watching very closely. And when I say we, people like Don, people in the regional council, people within the city, we're all watching and we're waiting for that opportunity.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Councillor Mallett.
Thank you. On page 28, paragraph 15 refers to bang for buck from investment. You'll be familiar with the concept of opportunity cost. What is the opportunity cost of this? What if we spend money on this, we're not spending money somewhere else?
So that statement there is talking about by having a joined up approach. There's so many agencies involved in this type of activity, and you have the opportunity to get better gains for your investment by working together rather than working in silos.
Okay, so what are some of examples of that then?
So one of the issues is that if you get your structure right, there's quite a lot of significant appetite exists from a number of funders to support community-led and environmental groups for biodiversity. And just to give you an example of that, Taranaki Wild is set up in a trust situation.
Taranaki what, sorry?
Taranaki Wild
Oh, yeah.
is set up in a trust situation. Recently, they got $11 million to help with their projects in that area.
Yeah, so just linking to that, the Billion Trees program that we haven't yet had an opportunity to bid to requires the same sort of approach of a connected, joined-up thinking where you can go to a range of different sorts of funds through the Provincial Growth Fund, funds from philanthropists like the Next Foundation have all come to the party for some of the big examples of biodiversity projects that are occurring in both Taranaki and in the Hawke's Bay. So they've pioneered the way of how you can do this in terms of joined-up thinking. But I think the other thing to remember, Gary, is to do with the other benefits that come from the projects that are being discussed here. And Don is probably better to talk to the tourism benefit, you know, the notion of a trail that operates across the city and the region, which will bring people into our region and have them stay for longer, including international visitors who really are focused on these sorts of projects. So there are a whole range of other benefits, and of course the benefits of ecosystem services, both in terms of purifying air, purifying water. There's a wide range of benefits that come from investment like this, and this is why many businesses nowadays are integrating these sorts of approaches into their routine operation, including Mercury.
So I think Bruce has really put the case very well for those dimensions, but can I just give two illustrations of where I've been able to really deliver some value at a community level by joining particularly funders up. So Ngāti Hawa Mahi Trust, who have done some work out in the gullies at Silverdale, and Pūniu River Care. These are what some people would call social enterprise, but what I'd call kaitiaki enterprise, where marae-based, we've got about 10 in each of those groups, 10 jobs in each of those groups, and they're busy doing restoration in biodiversity, wetland, environmental restoration out across their communities. Local jobs back home, delivering improved water quality, improved biodiversity to their communities.
Who's paying for that?
So we're able to, so by collaborating with the Waikato River Authority, with Regional Council, with councils often, with DOC, so Ngāti Hawa Mahi Trust have probably got I think now 12 contracts stretching out over 3 years. Pūniu River Care, they've been able to build a huge reputation. River Authority, the government's freshwater fund, the Waikato Catchment Ecological Enhancement Trust has been across those. Mercury's iwi partnerships supporting business growth in those two entities. Now
So is it ratepayer and taxpayer funded?
Yeah, and corporate shareholder funded.
None of those organisations, I'm not aware of them, but none of those organisations sounded like they were corporate. They all private business, they were all public money, weren't they?
I'm talking about Mercury's money, which is going into this as well.
Mm-hmm.
So these people are a part of our community, our Mercury's community.
So Mercury's putting money into it?
And we're getting to a point where farmers are starting to pay for these as well. So Pūniu River Care.
Mercury is putting money.
Yeah, yes. So Mercury is putting money into this, have done from the beginning, and that has been not just paying for plants, but paying and supporting them to grow their business processes so that they can become much more resilient and sustainable out into the future.
Can you explain whose business practices can be grown more sustainable? Sorry.
So Ngāti Hawa Mahi Trust and Pūniu River Care.
Okay, I think the question has been answered. Have
Well, I don't.
Have you got further questions?
I'll tell you when my question's answered. And the issue with Indigenous biodiversity, Indigenous means natural or native to the... Do you ever come into a situation where if you're planting these things and you're trying to stop erosion or that sort of carry on, that there's a better off having an exotic rather than, I mean, do we discriminate against, do we look for the best plant for the job, or do we automatically go, let's have a second-rate Indigenous thing that doesn't do the job quite as well? Because,
Well,
I mean, it's quite clearly Indigenous up there.
Yeah, I'll answer that one.
Well, I asked you, yeah, good on you.
I'll answer that one. So there is no discrimination of the style that you're describing at all. The notion here is best plant for the job. But I do need to remind you, Gary, that there are 2,500 species of native vascular plant that grow in New Zealand, and of those, approximately 850 species are characteristic of the Waikato region. So when you say, you know, we'll get a better exotic, what you need to demonstrate to me is from amongst that available biodiversity, Indigenous biodiversity, that there isn't a species that won't do the job better.
Well, I know nothing about plants, so I'm asking you if there's, are we underselling ourselves in terms of using Indigenous when there's an exotic that's better? That's all I'm asking.
No, I think what we're trying to achieve is a fair balance based on the removal of Indigenous systems from the landscape over the last 200 years, and the need, if we are going to protect our native plants and animals from extinction, to refocus and rebalance what is on the landscape, because approximately, within the Waikato region, approximately 95% of the landscape is dominated by exotic species.
But I think it's fair to say that this is the policy around, exactly as it says, local Indigenous biodiversity. And there are other ways in which council use plants for, as you quite rightly point out, Gary, for some things like erosion control or some other reason. And they might well, in those instances, use non-native trees.
Because we
a
are
completely
talking
different-
about plants. We're not talking about people here. We're talking about plants. That, you know, they're not sentient. They don't have, you know, consciousness and things and stuff.
So the answer to your question is
concern,
yes.
yeah, so my concern is, are we using the most appropriate plant for the job, or are we? And the job might not be erosion control. If it's a situation where you want something pretty, I accept that. You might find that there's a, but surely I'm just concerned that Indigenous is overtaking utility, or is more considered more important than delivering the purpose you want.
So as part of this project, what we have identified, and we've been working with Project Watershed, and Project Watershed does fund some of the erosion control throughout our gullies and streams within the city. And so by linking this project into Project Watershed and the Central Zone Manager of the Regional Council, we've actually brought those two things together so that they can work together.
To cut to the chase, I think to make it quite clear what this is about is how we pick up the Indigenous biodiversity. That does not mean in all instances Indigenous flora will be, flora and fauna will be in place. It's how do we go from the 2% to the 10%? That's all this policy is
And that's the
around.
question I'm asking.
Yes.
I'm trying to make sure that we don't
There's no
do this. Yeah.
Right, okay, cool. Any
Okay.
other questions on it?
Oh yeah, just on the, I note the references, that the P roll fit on in the references in the BR Clarkson are yourselves, are they?
Yes.
Not entirely. The other B. Clarkson is Beverly Clarkson, my other half.
So there are... All right, so... Okay.
All right, we'll come back to
So,
that.
so you guys are referencing your own work, eh?
Oh, what, you're saying this is self-citation, are you, Gary?
Well, it is, isn't it?
No, it's not. So the thing is this.
I mean, that can be good or bad. I'm
Yeah,
not
yeah.
saying you're crooks. I'm just
So
saying...
the thing is
that-
this, Gary.
No, hang on, don't get all upset. I'm not
I'm
saying
not,
this is
I'm
bad.
not. I'm gonna tell you the facts.
See, what we do in our meetings is we declare
Yeah.
any possible conflict of interest.
Yeah.
We declare it, and then no, it's irrelevant. Don't worry about it. And I just wanted to find out if that was.
Well, I'm going to answer your question if you'll let me.
Go ahead.
So, for the last 35 years, myself and my wife have been the principal contributors to the literature on biodiversity in Hamilton and the wider Waikato. My wife, through her expertise working for Manaaki Whenua Landcare Research, is the national leader of the Wetland Ecosystems Program, and myself, through continuing research, particularly in the urban ecology area. So it's no surprise that if you go searching through the literature to find references relevant to the topic at hand today, which is local Indigenous biodiversity, that the people living in the city who've been doing the research will be cited.
Yep, and we're a small country, and everyone knows everyone. Yep. No,
So
got that.
thank you. Let's move on from that. I think we'll move on with the questioning. If you have any more later, that's fine. Māngai, Thompson, Evans.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kia ora, good morning. I've got about 4 questions, and I guess the first one, and forgive me if I haven't read through the document properly, was around the genetic modified organisms. And if there's any within the... Is this a threat? Would it be a future threat to us achieving 10% over time? Is there a percentage of the plants and whatnot that we're putting in that are genetically modified?
No. There is no use of GMOs in what we're proposing here. It's not part of the plan.
Okay, cool, thank you. The next question was around the references, and I note that there's no reference to the Waikato Tainui environmental plan, which actually had a whole chapter, chapter 15, dedicated to biodiversity. Was there a reason for that? I note, however, on page 100 that there's reference to stakeholder interests, but no specific reference throughout the strategy to the plan at all.
It's in the legal and policy analysis.
So if you look in the legal and policy considerations, we have identified all the requirements that we're supposed to take into account, and we do mention about the vision and strategy in paragraph 22.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I also note that Councillor Henry raised the around the landowners. But I'm hoping to get an actual sense of the landowners' willingness to engage, noting that we had 550 landowners registered, but how will we engage them? So again, that doesn't hinder on achieving the 10% that we're looking to get.
So I believe that'll come out of the strategy once it's finalised, in terms of any communication plan from that.
Okay, hopefully.
So at the moment, we've got about 33 odd community groups working around the city in different forms.
But especially into the gullies, there's landowners around there. Their involvement, will that, or their idea to not be involved, will that impede us achieving the 10% is essentially what I'm asking.
It certainly can do,
Yeah.
yeah. And there are situations of that in some of the gully systems at the moment, whereby you've got a lot of work going on in and around a private property owner.
Yeah.
And sometimes that does hinder work within that gully system.
Okay.
So, Marla, am I correct in assuming that what you would like to see is some more detail around how the stakeholder engagement process
Yes,
is going
please.
to occur?
Yeah.
And also, I think I heard you mention, because you're quite right, Waikato Tainui do have the river plan, which we're familiar with, we're all familiar with, but they also have, I went to the launch, the Waikato Tainui biodiversity plan, which is not the same document at all. Am I hearing from you in the form of your questioning that you would like some greater reflection and integration with that document?
Yes, please.
That's very useful information for us too. So it will also appear in our Waikato Tainui co-governance meetings as a discussion there. So we can pick up how that could work later. But just wanted to capture those because I felt that you were, concerned about a number of aspects that could be strengthened. And so I think that's what we've picked up there, yes?
All right. And I'd just like to remind you, through this process that we have done quite a lot of consultation with the stakeholders.
I do note that, and it has been
yeah.
quite extensive. I think my view was just around perhaps strengthening it even more. Sure. I guess the last question I have might actually be for you, Lance, around this. I'm not too sure. Wanting to understand the measurements within the collective impact framework a bit more. And I guess what I'm trying to find out is have we considered how within the framework that there are transferable outcomes when we speak about the measurements, and particularly within the internal collective impact that we can have as council business? We'll look at it.
So I'm not...
I'm not sure that we've understood your question. Are you talking about intervention logic and outcome assessment? Is that what you're talking about?
Partially, I guess, probably for the council. This is why I'm saying it may be an internal question, maybe for Lance. In the measurement, are the outcomes transferable to other areas of business that we're involved in?
Right, absolutely. So some of the feeding documents that sit behind this plan that's been tabled today, including an analysis of the style of monitoring and measurement that would be needed to be undertaken to determine whether or not the outcome of biodiversity enhancement is being met. So there's actually quite a body of material that sits behind this document that we should share with you, which essentially is an attempt to, first of all, measure how we are progressing towards an outcome. And then because the methodologies that are being used are more general methodologies that can apply across different parts of the region and different parts of New Zealand, there are some quite standard methodologies, including ones relating to cultural indicators and methodologies relating to monitoring recovery of vegetation, monitoring reduction in pest animals. The results will be transferable to other parts of New Zealand. And in fact, it was on the back of that notion as to why in the consultation group for the New Zealand Biodiversity Strategy that Hamilton was singled out as an example because of the applicability of what is being done here to other parts of the country, particularly the urban environment.
Excellent. Thank you, Professor.
Questions? Great. Thank you. And just a reminder, councillors, that this is in development because we won't be doing any final adoption until next year. I've got a question on that myself later. Councillor Gallagher.
Thank you. My questions are also partially directed to Lance because it's around funding. If we take the gully restoration, there's a history of what the council has done and not done. I was particularly concerned to pick up Professor Clarkson's point about 550 registered landowners with whom the communication Could you just clarify that? It was saying the communication has basically drifted a bit in that area because
Yeah, so what used to happen in the gully restoration program, there was a database held by the City Council of landowners who backed on to gullies, basically. And when the gully program first started, of course, they were all given the copy of the restoration guide. And then there was ongoing communication through a series of gully restoration newsletters and ongoing communications through opportunities for sponsored workshops to help them, you know, get the skills and capability they needed to do the restoration in their own backyard. So those are the parts of the bigger picture that have sort of gone into abeyance.
I think, Lance, just give us remind us as councillors, if you would, what we did and why we, not why we did it, what we did, because it seems to me it's a really critical point if we're talking about biodiversity. And we've had a database, you know, gully systems and all that, and because of some funding constraints. So that was a result of the budget cuts.
Correct. Back in 2012, when we went through the LTP, obviously we had to look at rationalising budgets, and that was one of the hard decisions that council made. And when we started having to do prioritisation of where we would find that rationalisation of budgets, and you probably recall how difficult that was when you're comparing restoration versus park maintenance versus roadside maintenance, etc., etc. So
that was the saving the Rogers Rose Garden budget, that one.
I won't comment on that.
Yeah, okay, thank you. No, it just so that comes, and it comes through a new process, because now with the legislation we have the mayor of the day, you know, is the first mover, leads the budget with the senior leadership team. And what I'm trying to get at, I guess, is the question in an ideal sense, perhaps back to Professor Clarkson, is it's a matter of having some of those key things of sufficient visuality in the beginning. And I know subsequently through a submissions process, your work on Lake Whaiwhakariki is a good example where things came back into a budget because of submissions. If you hadn't been there, who knows what would have happened. I'm just trying to tease out here, you know, we have a report, but, you know, when the rubber hits the road is a kind of, at what point do you put some realistic proposals for LTP funding and, you know, the appendices of all the other external funding sources that are available at the same time. And I'm just trying to think, I guess, to you, Professor Clarkson, what would be your ideal? So, you know, about our processes?
Yeah, so you know, I understand entirely why the reduction occurred, and it's explicable given the financial situation at the time. What I'm really interested in is the future and how we might put the bits back in place, I guess. And so recently the Waikato Trust has allocated some money to further work on this project, combined work between the Regional Council and the City Council. And I would be hoping that that funding will be the catalyst to start the process of finding out what are the bits that need to be reinstated and how they might be reinstated. And of course, just a reminder too that in the submission process for the LTP, these gaps were identified, not just in relation to Waiwhakariki, but also in terms of the Gully Restoration Program. But I think we now have a path ahead because the money that's been allocated by Waikato Trust to the Regional Council and the City Council to carry on this work and bring it through to an implementation phase will be basically the opportunity to rectify some of these current limitations.
Yeah, it's just a flag. I mean, we have tough decisions, and I'm not. I'm criticising the governors, not staff, on the budget, on aspects of it. In terms of the database, however, what might we do in this? Is there anything we can do in the short term? I mean, 550 landowners is a pretty huge partnership potentially.
I honestly don't know the status of the current database within the City Council, and the figures that I've given you are my recollection of the numbers that used to be in it. I don't know when it was last used or accessed, whether it's been archived, whether it's still functioning, I don't know.
So Councillor Gallagher, perhaps I can help. I don't have the figures on me, but I'm happy to get them and circulate that. What I do know is that we do have a resource on the 4th floor, Gerard Kelly, who many of you will be aware of, who is very actively working with our communities and groups. This project itself has afforded us the opportunity to work more closely with Regional Council. So yes, it is a work in progress. We're not doing as much as we potentially could, but I'm quite excited about the opportunity here for us to understand our partners, to understand what the priorities are, and then we can start targeting what our potential spend or gaps are. So I think there is a real opportunity, and I'll certainly get you that other information.
I mean, through the chair, obviously, as you know, no councillor wants to give you guys extra work ever. But it seems to me the role of this, with the word environment in the name of the committee, and in terms of it, whether it's through a GM report or a chair's report, it's just having, out of this session,
getting a little
I'd really
bit
like
into
a flag,
debate here.
if I can, on that. Can I just refer now to page 19 of your report? And this was to do with the community, ecological and combined priorities, and it's given detail on the appendix on page 55 of your report. And again, perhaps back to Professor Clarkson, in terms of visuality, because these are the sort of top 10 sites. I guess I'm making an LTP, annual plan budget, GM report, whatever. What extra work do we need to do to sort of keep these on the radar? I don't know if you've got any ideas. I'm just anxious we don't lose.
Okay, the question is how we look after this set of combined priorities.
I believe this will fall out of.
Telling us the page in our agenda?
Oh, it's page 54. The summary is page 54 on your agenda, and and the detail is in the appendix later on. The intent of this question is to say, we're having a whole lot of talks around different green spaces, management plans, whatever, and it seems to me that you've clearly identified, for a whole range of different reasons, which is in the appendices, why we need to zero in on these sort of key ones. And I guess what I'm trying to do is to Paul and Professor to yourselves or to our team, is to work out how we can have an ongoing kind of status report, and particularly when we're coming to a 10-year plan, we've got these up there somewhere.
Yeah. So in Appendix 2, these top 10 priority sites, they've been identified through a methodology that we've developed through this program. At this point in time, I just advise that we're still working through the cultural aspects.
Right.
And I believe anything further that the council wants to add to this in the future would come through the strategy, and any action plan as part of that strategy.
Yeah, I just to the GM, I guess what I'm trying to do in my layperson sense is make sure that we have, there's some sort of, like when we consider these, there's some status, there's some flag, there's some reminder.
So the question has been asked, and I guess, we get where you're coming with from that. Hold any comments you want for your discussion. Any further quick questions? Because I have a number of others.
That's fine, I'll save it for debate.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gallagher. Councillor O'Leary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The report, Lance or to Maria, says that you've got, this will be done under business as usual budgets. But how much is that? Because this is a fairly significant piece of work. So do we have a bit of an idea of what budget you do have to play with?
Yes, so our operating budget does have a separate portion for our natural areas. I guess what the strategy here will allow us to do, as I said, is target that and direct it in tandem with our partners to make sure that we're doing the right things at the right time with the right amount of money. It's worth noting that the development of this strategy has involved park staff out of operating time and budget, because we do feel that it is a very important piece of work. We have project leaders on the 4th floor who are dedicated to natural areas and will continue to be so.
So you still need to answer my question. So you will have an idea of how much out of that operating budget for parks and recs or whatever it is, green spaces, whatever you said, that you can redirect to this project. So
Yes.
what is that?
That's still to be determined. We're still figuring that out once we've got our priorities.
Okay, so,
Can I just make a comment though?
yeah.
To go from 2% to 10%, it won't be enough.
So that's where I'm leading with my questions. Now, Councillor Malla asked an economic question that wasn't actually answered, and probably that's okay around, you know, what are we losing if we do this work? But I was leading to that, General Manager, because going from 2% to 8% is considerable. How much are we going to be short, so that we can start thinking about this either with next year's annual plan or the following or an LTP, because we don't do anywhere near enough in this space.
Well, I think what all this is saying is there's been a good start on, and we've got a lot of good information, but that's the next step to actually make sure we're clear on the priorities and then look at the resources you need. And it may not just be council, and Don alluded to that, it's a partnership, and there's all sorts of funding out there. And I think through like the Waiwhakariki Advisory Group and the Friends of Waiwhakariki, there's been, you know, a lot of money from regional council, from DOC, from a whole bunch of different philanthropic funders, where get the priorities and then tell council what do we actually need to do these top priorities. And currently we've got whatever it is, $500,000 in the council budget for the natural areas people and some work that city parks do and that sort of stuff. But we actually need X amount of dollars to actually achieve this. So that's the next step of work. And alluding to what Councillor Gallagher said was the place would be annual plan or LTP.
Okay. So as long as
would it be useful, because this doesn't get properly adopted until quite some time down the track, would it be useful to have that level
Yes.
of information provided to council so that we could understand
Yeah, it would be.
what the resources that need to come alongside that? Is that what you're...
Yeah, and if at that time the committee or the council decides to actually reprioritise that as well, but we can't do that unless we've got that quantum of...
Yeah, so you'll need to know the ballpark figures, and then
Yep.
as you'd have to prioritise all of council's expenditure, then as elected members you can weigh that up and
Yep.
make decisions.
Yep.
At
My second question is just around, like, this is a fairly detailed and technical document, and a lot of the future successes will be, as you say, and as the Professor says, in the partnerships. There was quite a lot of text and comment around sort of the future comms plan and the website and those kinds of things. Can you assure me that to get the general public on board, we will develop a comms plan and a website that is really easy and accessible and tangible for Joe public to get on board? Because people do want to get on board with this kind of work. And who will be working on that kind of comms stuff?
So part of the report is about restructuring how things are done. And you may recall that Trust Waikato have come on board with the University of Waikato, the Regional Council and so forth. That the money that has been funded for that is to get this up and running. So $500,000 is committed for the next couple of years. That's through Trust Waikato University, Regional Council and the Department of Conservation. So they will, the intent is for them to get this going, you know, collectively.
Yeah, so I understand that. My question still remains, I need to be assured that the public facing of this project, which I 100% support, is in plain English, is fun, is exciting for general public to engage in it. Because this document's great and it gives me an idea of what you're planning, but it's technical and it's detailed and...
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
So the questions around what comms are going to be put in place, and it sounds like we also need to have a greater depth of understanding about that when we next come to this.
Yeah, and I just sort of, I was hoping, I guess, at this meeting that somebody would be able to say, look, that yes, HCC comms will be all over that. I mean, we've got an incredible new comms manager or someone, or it would be an activity that would be contracted in or something like
We're
that.
getting a little bit into discussion, but yes, I think the question was made.
question.
Yeah, the question
Which
was made
still,
well.
yeah,
Yeah.
remains unanswered. Okay, I'll follow it up with the general manager. Someone, it's an easy
Well, I think
it's an easy
Councillor O'Leary, we
question.
hear the question, and what we will do is make sure that by the next time we touch this topic, that those two questions, the one about the costs that go hand in hand with it and the communications plan that you're seeking, can be addressed, so that all councillors can be in with the same amount of information. Would that help?
Well, those are my questions. Yes.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Councillor, have you finished, Councillor O'Leary? Councillor Casson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the report. I've just got a few questions here. I note in attachment 2, page 44, on the goals at the top there, says that a 20% target would be preferable, which is quite a lofty target here. But my question in regards to that was, how will we know when we have hit that 10% mark? How will we actually measure that?
Well, that's part of the monitoring, which is proposed in the report. And part of that is that you monitor the area of Indigenous vegetation throughout your gully systems. So as part of that, what is also proposed, and is the development of a couple of apps being undertaken at the moment, one through Landcare and the University of Waikato for the community to be able to measure water quality and biodiversity. So everybody walks around with these days. And so the idea is that information can be inputted by anybody in the community in terms of what's actually happening on the ground. So there is another app being developed by the Regional Council also, and that's for the use by the community groups who can input their information into an app, and we will receive that information.
So if I could just add, it's a really simple spatial mapping process, which you'll be familiar with Google Earth. Nowadays, you can pretty well do this just by, on your own home computer, zeroing in on the image of the city and being able to identify the differences in texture of the canopy layer of the trees, and thereby characterise what proportion of the gullies is dominated by native species versus, for example, weeds like willow, alder and all the rest. So there are very simple methodologies which have been developed as part of this plan, which would enable the monitoring and the measurement of how are we trending towards the 10% target. And it would be really nice if the City Council might even have a little clock type measurement device on their front page, which showed the temperature graph increasing as we get closer towards the 10% mark. You know, those sorts of methods are very easy to incorporate onto websites these days.
Okay, just following on from that, point 8 on page 28 just has the 20% target will be reached, or sorry, the 10% target will be reached over a period of time. Do we actually have a set target date for this to be completed, or is it just ongoing?
No, no set time. It's just ongoing. It's quite hard to predict how long it will take unless you've got the money in behind it.
Okay, and following on from that then, with Councillor O'Leary about asking for a ballpark figure and costs and everything, have we considered working in with people like the Department of Corrections to have some of this work done, because they do have community work programs where that work can be done on community projects. It can't be done on private property, but it can be done on community projects such as gullies and everything else. Have we thought about working, and it's probably a question for Lance, have we thought about working in with the Department of Corrections to so their workers can help us with a few of these plantings? And it would also cut down the cost too, because they don't actually charge.
So yes, we have, is the short answer. We've had some initial discussions with Department of Corrections, and they were not able to reconcile some of our PPE requirements in terms of being able to provide them for their workers so that we could have them on our sites, but we have left the door open. We do engage with as many sort of corporates and other community groups as we can. So, yes.
My philosophy is with this sort of stuff, I believe if you can get people to plant trees for nothing, and it's community led, and corrections might be part of that. There might be a whole bunch of different, there's a lot of volunteers out there, and Bruce is involved with that physically himself, and there's a number of us in this room. I think there's more strength to it, and you get more support, and it actually grows organically, excuse the pun, than us paying city park staff to plant trees, which sort of grates with me. I used to run the regional parks network in Auckland, and we didn't pay anyone to plant trees, and we used to plant 40,000 trees a year. So I think enhancing what Gerard Kelly's doing is actually you're better off putting your effort into harnessing the community and the goodwill there, and other innovative ways, and it might be corrections, people doing their community service and that sort of thing. I think that's the best way to go, and I think you get that you get a lot more buy-in that way from people, and they will, it almost becomes viral. I'll talk to other people, and families going out planting trees. It's quite a good day out. Kids have normally had enough after an hour and a half, a couple of hours, but just be aware, one hour of staff time is needed for 8 hours of volunteer time. So there is a sort of a ratio there which is quite standard. But I think it's not lost on us, and it's about having the right conversations with the right people. As you would know, with Corrections Department, community service people, supervision is the key, and having the right equipment, as Maria said, and supervision is absolutely paramount to get a good job done, and a whole bunch of other reasons too.
Yeah, it's to stop other exotic plants being planted. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just have a couple of super quick questions myself. In the fact that this recommendation puts us out to September 2019, it's quite a long time. On page 13 on the comment where we're talking about the common agenda, my experience in the past has shown that to 40
Page number in our agenda.
48.
Thank you.
48. My experience, my study has shown that to get really good outcomes on the ground for biodiversity strategies, you need to get a strong political support. I'm just not sure what the governance, how you're going to work with governors to get them engaged to be political champions of this. Has that been thought about, or will be thought about at some stage? Certainly it was an essential element in Project Halo.
Yeah.
Based on the structure proposed, we believe the trust will have quite a lot of momentum and involve a lot of agencies to get this thing going.
Yeah, and it's really about the governance here, the politicals, because at the end of the day, as has been alluded to in some of the questions, you're going to need some dollars around this in an annual plan, a long-term plan, etc. And you're going to need some political championship from the members around this table. So I just need to understand at some stage, and if you could get back to me about how that's planned to occur. Just a couple of more bent corners, won't be a second. In terms of the, on page 65 of our agenda, a strategic shift towards collaboration, will we be able to get some further detail at some stage around the key sources of funding for biodiversity? We've got really awesome team of staff who are always looking at funding for our projects, but I think it would be, there'd be less visibility about why the pots of money are for biodiversity, and I'd like to understand what ones you're going to dip into. The other question I have, you don't need to provide that for me now, because I do see this as being something that we all have to come back to. The diagram on page 79, the pie chart, has a little sticky out bit that says coordinators and it's got a question mark in there. Can you tell me why there is a question mark in there?
So the question mark is whether or not we carry on with this pilot project and get those actions completed.
Okay, so dependent on the decision of council here today, we would put resources into a coordinator.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That helps me there.
Well, we would utilise existing staff. for
We would
this
use,
purpose.
yeah, so we would
Yeah.
move some things around to make sure that the coordinator was resourced. Is that,
Yeah.
that's what that means? Okay, cool, thank you. Thank you, councillors, for the good debate on this topic. We'll now move into discussion, if there is any. I'm happy to, or unless somebody else wanted to.
Second, whatever you want to move it, second, happy,
Is there anybody
whatever.
passionately keen to
I'm happy,
move
well, I'm
it?
keen and passionate, but I will be second or a mover, whatever.
Okay, thank you. I'll move it then, and you can second it. Well, okay, I suppose as the mover, I'll just quickly speak my views. I was going to hold them to the end. I'm very excited about what we can achieve here. As Bruce has said, I'm also not going to focus on the past and how we got here, but I do note that when we make cuts to programs, it always, somewhere down the line, has a repercussion, and that's what is the case here. I am keen that we meet our obligations under the regional policy statement, which is all about enhance and protect. It's not just about maintaining where we're currently at, it goes well beyond that. And I think that the working party that government has put in place to redo their strategy is but the beginning of where they're going with this as well. In the pipeline for quite a few years now, there has been the idea that a national policy statement for biodiversity might arise, just as it did with water quality. And I guess that could be a potential outcome of the work of this advisory group, have a strategy in place and then require local government to implement that. So this is a place where we can get ahead of the game, show leadership. It's really exciting that we live in a city with gullies, with a river esplanade, and some reserved green spaces, many of which are in okay condition and some which can do a lot better, because that's the bedrock for us being successful with biodiversity. I do strongly feel that unless the councillors around the table get behind it, we'll always be struggling. That was the case certainly with a number of projects I've been previously involved in, where in the beginning we had to fight tooth and nail for funding. Halo project, which now everyone accepts as a success within its own right, stands on its own leg, doesn't need political support. It keeps going, keeps delivering, but in the beginning, every year was a big argument about whether that should receive any funding. Every year for about 6 years. When the birds started flying freely, people were happy with it. The public accepted it and value it. So we've got a bit of a journey to go. Exciting things like Lake Waiwhakariki will really help us here champion our cause. So yeah, and if you want to have a good example of what the future can look like, I do invite you to go out to the other showcase project, which is the Mangatau Tree Sanctuary Island, if you haven't been out there. In fact, I think we're going to be invited one time there for potentially an afternoon tea, and that will show you what you can deliver when you put biodiversity at the heart of some decision making. Thank you. Councillor Mallett.
Thank you. I don't support this. First of all, I think the target's wrong. I like plants as much as anyone, but I think plants have to add value. And I'm concerned that we have decided to ignore a whole bunch of plants just because they're not indigenous. There's a whole lot of reasons why you want to have plants that are useful at combating erosion. You might have plants that are useful for siphoning water through and stormwater, things like that. There are other plants that grow fruit. There's there's thousands of reasons why you pick one plant over another plant. I don't see the value in indigenous versus other things. Now, there might be occasions when the indigenous plant is the better plant, that adds more utility. So I think the target's wrong. Secondly, I am, this is one of the very many projects we are about to undertake with absolutely no understanding of the cost of this thing. There are two types of money. There's voluntary money, and that's money that people, from that this task may be funded through, and that'll be charity money, volunteers' time, private landowners agreeing to fund things, philanthropic money. That's all well and good. But I'm here as a representative of the other sort of money, which is the forced money, and that's the ratepayers and the landowners who are going to be asked to going to be expected to fund this. And there's nothing voluntary in the way that money will be taken. And I'm particularly concerned about the hidden costs, and this is a ubiquitous thing that's happening across the whole organisation. We've got battalions of staff working away on these projects, and we are seeing no visibility on that. Now, there's an opportunity cost for those things. These people are working away on Project A, Project B, Project C. We get very little visibility of the actual business as usual cost of these things, and a number of people have alluded to it during the debate this morning, or this afternoon, or this morning, and I'm now starting to get very, very concerned, because if you have a look at our since the last decade, our wages bill has been going up dramatically, way greater than the rate of inflation, and this is one of the reasons. It's not just projects; it's the business as usual cost that we are avoiding, and unfortunately, we are just getting no visibility on that at all. So, for a number of reasons, I shall be voting against this.
Thank you, Councillor O'Leary.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Look, it's been my experience over the years that when we start talking about playgrounds and play spaces and parks and rivers, that usually residents or a resident will have a particular favourite area of the city. That might be the lake, it might be the river paths, it might be the gullies. And for me, it is actually the gullies. I see massive opportunity. So I'm not going to talk about all of the detail that's in this report. It has my 100% support. My worry is that we will need to reprioritise some funding. I went down a few weeks ago, and possibly I should have invited some other of my colleagues for a bit of a Sunday walk, and I visited the Waikato Whiriwhiri stream, and I was disgusted actually at the state of that stream, at that gully. And when you're walking along the path, the bank of the gully is right there, or the promenade, or whatever we call it, and there's broken glass bottles sticking out of it, like actually coming out, because I think it was used to be a landfill, and it's just there, and it's just all falling onto the path where people will walk and children will play, and it's a beautiful area with the bird life and some of the native trees, but it's overgrown, it's neglected, and this broken glass coming out of the land really shocked me. And it's probably not the only gully or natural area in our city that looks like that. So next time I go for a walk, I'll invite some of my colleagues, because I did end up at the Sugar Bowl Cafe, which, is always mandatory when you go for a Sunday walk. But I'm interested in this coming back, because that really did disturb me. And it's easy to look at reports in front of us and sit in this chamber. It's not till we actually get out there in the real world and have a look. And I think if my colleagues had come with me on that Sunday, this discussion today would be a little bit different, and there'd be a little bit more urgency around it, because that's open to the public now. So look forward to the next step.
Thank you, Councillor O'Leary. Councillor Gallagher.
Thank you. Obviously, one of the great challenges in local government, as we know, is how you fund local communities and infrastructure, of which, of course, maintaining and adding to biodiversity is critical. So when we have a report for every new councillor that talks about, the financial state of the books, the state of our infrastructure, facilities, etc. Obviously, what's critical in this is what is the state of our biodiversity. We should also, as well, acknowledge the huge progress over generations, And I note, the top 10 projects that I alluded to before, they have had their evolution and work done there over a number of years, and we should acknowledge that. And obviously what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to build on and enhance. I also want to particularly acknowledge this model where we do have an external advisory committee in addition to the current 2 people in front of us. Thank you so much for your work. But add to that Dal Hood, former and respected Chief Medical Officer of Health, very important independent statutory role. Medical Officer of Health talks about environment, about public health, so totally appropriate that she's on this particular group. And then obviously Shane Nartai, who's a very, very good principal, known him for years, and again, a good example of where, if we work with schools, there's the Fairfield College project, there's a range of projects where our schools can be friends and allies. And I acknowledge Councillor Mallett's concern around funding, but this is also around a whole partnership. So when I talk of the LTP, which is revised every 3 years, our 3-year budget window, which any council has control over, obviously we need to have visibility and awareness of what are those other funding sources as well, and obviously then how do we use the money that we put in, from the city rates, etc., and other fees to enhance this. I will say we've also been in Committee Room 1. There was a session the other day, bit of a workshop. What do we want to see in Hamilton in 50 years, 30 years? Everyone talked about the green canopy. They talked about the city, the river. They talked about environment. And if we talk also about human beings and human health, I can say, and forgive my perverse humour, Madam Chair, my health is added to the fact that, okay, when I hear, literally in my area, what I think to be now the call of the tui and the beautiful bird calls, ironically, I immediately think Paula Southgate, I immediately think Bruce Clarkson, I don't know why, but I do. But also I think of the people, obviously, like the Jared Kellys of this world, of our staff and our team, who have been part of all of the many, many people who have brought all that together. And I'm going to say, from a health point of view, an environment point of view, would I want to spend some of my property tax rates on having a lovely city with the green canopy, with health and environment and all of that, along with other funding, tax funding, philanthropic funding? Of course I would. And I will also make the point that that makes us incredibly marketable as a city that attracts people to come and live, work and invest here. So full steam. And to the GM, I think it's really important that if we can develop some regular series of progress indicators so that we don't lose this important stuff in the hundreds, tons of other stuff we have to do, but actually they're totally integrated and totally relevant to a whole range of projects we have on hand at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks, Chair. Just jumping on the coattails of Deputy Mayor there, just wanting to acknowledge the work that you guys have done, and I think it's pretty exciting. I think obviously there's some information to come back as it develops, but that's to be expected with a pilot, of course. And just acknowledge the Mercuries of this world and the work you're doing there, Don. I think there's a lot of corporate funding we are yet to tap into for this sort of thing, that people want to be associated with this kind of thing. So, yeah, look forward to seeing more in this space.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. Councillor Henry.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And yes, thank you so much for that report. I think it's very timely. And remembering many years ago, I stood on the 9th floor here and looked down, and Hamilton was just one sea of green, but it actually has diminished over the years. And I just would love to see that back again, because when you go to other countries, cities around the world, you do not see anything like that. You see concrete, concrete and more concrete, and a little bit of tree and one tree in between. So we are in a very, very enviable environment, and we do not want to lose that. We want to add to it. And I was very, I was actually stunned how very little Indigenous biodiversity we have in Hamilton, I thought there was a lot more. So I'm really excited that this project is in the making, and yes, we need to know some of the financial challenges there, but on the other hand, I'm also, I feel that if the public buys in, they will work really hard on getting that getting it going, keeping it going, and I'm just thinking about the gully. Maybe the schools close to it could go and do some plogging. I hope everybody knows what plogging is. It's doing exercise while you're cleaning up. So it's a new way of exercising, and I think it's a fabulous way. Everybody should have some bags with them to pick up the rubbish on the way wherever they go. So maybe there's some way we can work with local schools and maybe even retirement villages. They might want to go out there plogging as well. So I'm looking forward to this pilot project. I will support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Henry. Anyone else? Small right of reply. To me, this is quite simple. We have a legal obligation, we have a community obligation, and we have an ethical obligation to do this work, to take care of our biodiversity. No one's going to thank us if here in Hamilton, as we build our growing city, we destroy the natural heritage. New Zealand in itself, and Waikato's part of that, and Hamilton's part of it, has a woeful rate of extinction and destroying of native environment. It absolutely does. That's the fact of it. So biodiversity, in my view, is not an add-on. It's not something we do in addition to our core functions as a council. It's how we do our core functions as a council, and it's just as important as the other aspects. It needs to be integrated into the way we do things, so that as we grow, we also provide greater opportunities for maintaining and enhancing the green space and all the critters that live in that green space. We're really lucky actually here in Hamilton, because we do have the head start of the natural base, but we also, and some historic investment into things like Claudelands Bush to Papanui and like Waiwhakareki and the likes. But we're also lucky because we have some passionate private citizens who are either doing work on their own land, such as the Fairfield project, which I recommend you all have a look at, and also things like Manga Iti gully restoration, which although includes gully land that the public owns, most of the work there has been driven by the vision of the locals and the hard work of the locals. So we are lucky. But I want to thank Councillor Casson again at this point, because some months ago he said this committee should be called Community Services and Environment Committee, and he was quite right, because the environment side of things was not something, we had a very busy year with LTP and so on, that we had spent a lot of time discussing. So I want to thank everyone today for having a really good go at this topic and bringing a key environmental consideration for this council front and centre. So thank you to the staff also, and our partners, for all the work that you've done around this space. And I would say to people who are in other areas of council, like Jen, that she knows we've got to work together across this issue. We've got to have a bigger city, but it's got to be better as we go, and that's something we all share in common. So we'll go to the vote.
The motion is carried, 12 for, 1 against.
Thank you, councillors. We will now have the next item with Lisa here, and then we will take a lunch break. So the next item is on page 107. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, yeah, that was close. And while you're getting settled, can we take it on behalf of council? We wish you the very, very best for the exciting arrival of a new member of your family.
Thank you.
And we want to thank you for the excellent work that you have done, and we know you'll be back, and there'll be someone standing in your shoes in the meantime. So it's very exciting to have you here today to do this piece of the work and then go on your leave.
Thank you. Good afternoon, councillors, Māngai Māori, representatives. I'd just like to put forward the report as read, and happy to take any questions.
I think, Madam Chair, we've had a briefing on this previously, and this item just sort of confirms what we had at the briefing. Just one thing about these being priority projects that came up in the LTP. Just wanted to make the point that if other opportunities arise, this doesn't mean to say that we can't amend this plan, and I think Lisa's alluded to it in her report that it can be a live document. I think if some of you may have been here when, like, the next foundation was announced and there was a whole lot of money for ecological restoration, a whole bunch of different projects. Provincial growth funds sort of, come along. There's different things happen, and sometimes we actually also get approached by interested parties who might want to sponsor or enter into some sort of business arrangement with us. So just realise there's a point in time, set some priorities where Lisa or Lisa's replacement while she's away on parental leave, put their priorities, and just also remember there's going to be the discussion around the river plan priorities as well, coming up at a briefing soon, which Natasha will be talking through. And probably some of the smaller projects like bat walks and things like that, I have delegation to tick off applications from staff for under $20,000 to go for the smaller type applications. So they're sort of almost business as usual type things, which won't cannibalise these larger projects. So I just wanted to make those points. So we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.
Question. The next item, item 10, is the Momentum Waikato application to the PG fund. If we sign this item here, external funding program plan, off today, and some members aren't happy with the next item, because the two are related, how are you going to deal with that? Because I guess Momentum, we can't take the two items together, can we? Because I'm assuming someone from Momentum will be here after lunch.
Yes, that he is planned to be here after lunch. 12:30 he was potentially here, but this one I didn't think would go on that long. Maybe it will.
Well, it's just I have some questions on item 10, and if this one, item 9, goes through, my questions might arise some conflict for me or another elected member. Can we do them together?
Or we could
The discussion at least, kind of.
We could potentially, we just have to.
Yeah.
I may be the
We
only
could
one.
take the other one first and then do this one next if that's,
So what we'll do
that's
then,
what you're concerned about.
but I don't want to put
But
staff to any extreme discomfort or anything. So if we take a lunch break now for half an hour, and then Calvin will be here, and Lisa, you'll still be able to be here.
Absolutely.
We'll do them. We'll do the Momentum one first, Councillor O'Leary, and then we'll come back to this one. We'll take them as a suite of
That'd be
related
great,
issues.
yeah.
So is everyone comfortable with half an hour for lunch, or we could do 40 minutes and come back at 10:02? 10:02. We'll come back at 10:02. Thank you. Is that enough time?